The first sound was not the voice. It was the silence, heavy, pressed tight against the walls of the cabin like something waiting to break. The plane hummed gently, floating above the clouds, pretending everything was normal. Then the voice cut through it, sharp, public, unforgiving. "Ma'am, you need to move, now." It didn't ask, it commanded. And just like that, the air inside the plane changed. Every head turned at once, necks twisted, eyes snapped open. Conversations died mid-sentence. A black woman stood frozen in the aisle, her fingers wrapped tight around her boarding pass like it was the last proof that she belonged anywhere at all. Her seat number was printed clearly, her name spelled right. She had paid. She had boarded on time. She had followed every rule they ever said mattered. But none of that mattered now, not when authority decided she didn't fit. The flight attendant stood over her, lips pressed thin, posture stiff with power. Her smile was gone, replaced by impatience, by certainty, the kind that doesn't feel the need to explain itself, the kind that knows the room will back it up. The woman tried to speak. Her voice was calm, soft, careful. She explained that this was her seat. She held up the boarding pass, her hand shaking just enough to notice. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't loud. She wasn't angry. She was doing what she had learned to do her whole life when the world misunderstood her presence. She was making herself smaller, but her words didn't land. They fell into the aisle and disappeared under the weight of authority. The attendant didn't look at the paper for more than a second. Didn't really look at her at all. "Either you comply," the attendant said, louder now, loud enough for everyone to hear, "or we escort you off this aircraft." That sentence hit harder than any insult. Escort you off. Like she was a threat. Like she had done something wrong. Like she should be grateful for the chance to leave quietly. Humiliation has a sound. It's not yelling, it's not laughter, it's the hush that follows a threat. The pause where no one speaks because everyone is watching. The moment when strangers decide it's safer to stay silent than to stand up. It's the sound of judgment hiding behind politeness. Phones tilted subtly, not openly, just enough. Someone a few rows back pretended to check messages, but angled the camera just right. A woman across the aisle stared, then quickly looked away. A man near the window sighed as if inconvenienced by the whole thing. No one said a word. The woman felt the heat rise in her chest. Her face burned. Not with anger, with shame that wasn't hers but still wrapped itself around her skin. She thought of how hard she worked, how careful she always was, how tired she was of moments like this. She swallowed. Slowly, she stepped aside. Not because she believed she was wrong, but because she knew what would happen if she didn't. She moved with dignity, even though something inside her cracked with every step. The aisle felt longer now, narrower, like it was closing in on her. As she passed first class, the judgment became clearer. A man in an expensive suit smirked without shame, like the situation had confirmed something he already believed. Another passenger relaxed back into his seat, relieved that whatever problem existed had been moved away from him. Someone whispered under their breath, figures. Not loud enough to challenge, loud enough to wound. She reached an empty seat further back, sat down carefully. Her hands trembled as she placed her bag under the seat. Her chest felt tight. Her eyes stung. Tears pressed forward, begging to fall. She stared straight ahead and refused them. Not here. Not for them. She would not give this cabin the satisfaction of seeing her break. The plane doors closed with a heavy thud. Final. Engines began to rumble. The sound vibrated through the floor, through her bones. Around her, life resumed. Seatbelts clicked. Conversations restarted in hushed tones. Laughter bubbled up in places it didn't belong. To everyone else, this was already over. Just another moment, another story to tell later. But for her, it wasn't over. She reached into her bag slowly, deliberately. Her movements were calm now, focused. She pulled out her phone and unlocked it. Her thumb hovered for just a second over the screen. Not in doubt, in resolve. She pressed one button. No dramatic gesture, no announcement. Just a call made quietly, the way real power often moves. She placed the phone back into her bag and leaned her head against the seat. 10 minutes passed. The plane began to taxi. A few passengers glanced at their watches. Someone complained softly about the delay. A child kicked the back of a seat. The world kept spinning. Then the engine slowed. The plane came to a stop. Murmurs spread, confused, annoyed. A man across the aisle frowned and lifted his head. The flight attendants exchanged looks, sharp and nervous now. One of them disappeared toward the front. A few seconds later, the captain's voice filled the cabin, calm, controlled, but different. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said and paused. That pause carried weight. "We need to return to the gate." Confusion rippled through the plane like a wave. Groans followed. Questions rose. Why? What happened? Is everything okay? No one looked at the woman at first. She stayed seated, hands folded, face unreadable. The plane turned slowly, rolling back the way it came. The engines hummed again, but the mood had shifted. This wasn't a simple delay. Everyone could feel it. Something was wrong. Something bigger than weather, bigger than luggage, bigger than a seat mix-up. The flight attendant who had spoken so loudly earlier stood near the front now, arms crossed tightly, her confidence replaced by tension. She avoided looking down the aisle. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, not in relief, in preparation. She knew what was coming. She had lived long enough to recognize the moment before a storm breaks. The plane docked at the gate. The seatbelt sign stayed on. That alone was strange. Voices rose in irritation. A businessman muttered about meetings. Someone complained about missing a connection. The inconvenience was becoming personal now. Then the door opened, not to let passengers off, but to let people on. Uniforms appeared. Airport officials, security. Their presence sucked the air out of the cabin. Conversations stopped again, sharper this time. Fear replaced annoyance. Authority had returned, but it felt different now. Heavier, serious. The woman opened her eyes. No one knew yet what her one quiet action had set in motion. No one knew that the humiliation they had watched without speaking had just traveled far beyond this plane. No one knew that systems were already reacting, that phones were ringing in offices far away, that decisions were being made. They just knew the flight wasn't leaving, and deep down every single person on that plane felt it. This wasn't just a delay. This was the moment before everything changed. The moment the plane locked back into the gate, the calm shattered. It didn't break softly. It exploded. A wave of sound rolled through the cabin like a storm finally released. Groans rose first. Long, tired groans filled with entitlement and impatience. Businessmen snapped their laptops shut and checked their watches with sharp movements, as if time itself had betrayed them. A mother bounced a crying child against her shoulder, whispering apologies that no one heard. Someone cursed under their breath. Everyone wanted answers. And more than that, everyone wanted someone to blame. The air felt heavier now, thicker, like breathing through something you couldn't see. The plane that had felt small before now felt cramped, tense, alive with suspicion. Eyes moved quickly, scanning faces, searching for the reason this inconvenience had landed on their laps. Frustration has a way of turning strangers into judges, and judges always look for a defendant. The flight crew stood stiff near the front. Their smiles were gone, their training showed in their posture, but fear leaked through the cracks. The same attendant who had raised her voice earlier now avoided looking down the aisle. Her shoulders were tight, her jaw clenched. She kept glancing toward the open door, toward the people stepping on board with purpose instead of boarding passes. Security entered first. Heavy steps, radios clipped to belts, serious faces. Then airport officials followed, dressed sharper, eyes sharper still. Then more uniforms. Too many for a simple delay, too many for a routine check. Each new figure added weight to the moment, pressing down on every passenger's chest. The woman stayed seated. She didn't fidget, didn't reach for her phone, didn't look around to measure reactions. She sat still, hands resting calmly in her lap, eyes forward. She looked like someone waiting for a storm she already knew was coming. Around her, panic built. Inside her, there was only focus. A man across the aisle leaned toward her, his voice low but edged with accusation. "What did you do?" he asked, not loud enough to draw attention, loud enough to demand something from her. His eyes searched her face, hoping for guilt or fear or confirmation that she was the problem. She didn't answer, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't have to. For once, the weight of explanation did not sit on her shoulders. For once, she wasn't responsible for making others comfortable with the truth. Silence became her strength, and that silence unsettled the cabin far more than any confession would have. Outside the plane, faint sirens echoed in the distance. Not close enough to explain, just close enough to raise questions. Inside, tension stretched tight, ready to snap. People whispered theories to each other. Mechanical issue, security threat, paperwork error. Someone mentioned weather, though the sky outside was clear and bright. Rumors flew faster than facts ever do, but the truth was heavier than all of it. Behind the scenes, phones were ringing. One call had turned into another, then another, not casual calls, not customer service calls. These came from offices that spoke in measured tones and carried authority, the kind that didn't waste time, the kind that didn't get ignored. The airline had received a formal report, then supporting evidence, then a request, then a warning. Words like compliance and liability entered conversations that usually stayed quiet. And when those words appear, things start moving fast. Up front, the attendant was gently pulled aside by an official. The interaction was quiet, but everyone could see it. Her posture collapsed. The confident authority she wore earlier melted away, replaced by something smaller, something scared. Her eyes darted, her hands fidgeted. The power she had leaned on minutes ago was no longer hers. Passengers close enough overheard fragments of the conversation. Not full sentences, just pieces, enough to change the mood. Formal complaint, recorded evidence, federal review. Words that don't belong in casual travel. Words that carry weight. Words that don't disappear. People began to shift in their seats. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was consequence. The man who had smirked earlier now stared straight ahead, his face tight. The woman who had looked away before now watched openly, curiosity replacing discomfort. The businessman who had complained loudest grew quiet, his irritation turning into concern. The cabin was waking up to something deeper than inconvenience. The woman remained seated a moment longer. She watched the realization spread. She felt the shift in the air, the subtle turn of energy. People no longer looked at her like a problem. They looked at her like a question. Then she stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just stood. The movement alone drew attention. Conversation stopped again, but this time the silence felt different, expectant, uncertain. She smoothed her jacket and walked forward, her steps measured, unhurried. She didn't look left or right. She didn't search for approval or forgiveness. An airport official met her halfway down the aisle. He addressed her by name, clearly, respectfully. The sound of it landed like a shockwave. Eyes widened, mouths parted, whispers changed tone mid-breath. Her name carried weight now. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't demanded. It was offered. A recognition of identity, of authority, of humanity. The official spoke quietly, but his posture said everything. He nodded as she spoke, listened closely, responded with care. This was not how problems were treated. This was how professionals were treated. This was how someone with standing was treated. The attendant watched from the side, her face pale, the The power dynamic had flipped completely, and everyone could see it. The woman who had been told she didn't belong now stood at the center of the moment, not as a disruption, but as the reason things were finally being addressed. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared openly, trying to reconcile what they had witnessed earlier with what they were seeing now. The same woman, the same seat, but a completely different story. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded attention, hadn't threatened anyone. She had simply refused to disappear. She had pressed one button and trusted the truth to do its work. The injustice that embarrassed her minutes ago was now under a spotlight far brighter than first class ever was. Brighter than status, brighter than money, brighter than the false comfort of silence. The cabin no longer felt united against a delay. It felt divided by awareness. Some passengers felt shame. Others felt relief. A few felt anger, not at her, but at themselves for not speaking sooner. The official thanked her quietly and stepped away. She turned back toward her seat, her face calm, her shoulders relaxed. As she walked, eyes followed her, not judging now, watching, learning. She sat down gently, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just shifted the entire room, but something had happened, something irreversible. The plane did not move. No announcement came. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was full of questions, full of reflection, full of the uncomfortable truth that sometimes injustice isn't loud. Sometimes it wears a uniform, sometimes it smiles, and sometimes it only gets challenged when the person it tries to shrink refuses to carry the weight alone. No one knew what would happen next. They only knew the flight still wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth. The truth did not arrive gently. It slammed into the cabin like sudden turbulence, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your mind can catch up. At first, no one understood what they were feeling, just that something solid had shifted beneath them. The air felt different, heavier in some places, lighter in others, the kind of change you don't see but know you can't undo. She wasn't just a passenger. That fact moved quietly at first, passed in low voices between officials near the front of the plane. But once it took shape, it spread fast. Faster than rumors, faster than judgment ever had. The woman everyone had watched get humiliated in silence was not confused, not powerless, not misplaced. She was a civil rights attorney, not the kind people expect, not loud, not showy, not wearing power on her sleeve, but precise, focused, the kind of professional who understands systems because she spent years fighting them. She specialized in transportation discrimination, airlines, trains, buses, places where authority moves fast and accountability moves slow. She wasn't flying for vacation. She was on her way to testify in a federal aviation case. Her seat assignment had not been random. It had been intentional, chosen carefully as part of a broader investigation. The route, the airline, the flight, all of it documented. Her phone call earlier wasn't a complaint tossed into the void. It was a report tied to case numbers, recordings, timestamps, and witnesses. This wasn't the first time she had been humiliated, but this time it had been captured. Every raised voice, every demand, every threat of being escorted off. It was all there, stored, labeled, ready. What had felt like a moment of public embarrassment had quietly transformed into evidence. That realization began to ripple through the cabin in subtle ways. People shifted in their seats, not from discomfort, but from awareness. The story they thought they had watched was no longer the story being told. The woman they had dismissed, in their minds, no longer fit the role they had assigned her. Up front, phones rang again. This time, the calls weren't being whispered. Executives were now involved. Real decisions were being made. Policies reviewed in real time. Names pulled up. Records checked. The airline's legal team moved fast, not to fix a problem, but to contain one. Across the country, screens lit up in operations centers. Flights were flagged, routes paused, not for weather, not for safety, but for compliance audits triggered by one report made from C-27. One woman, one call, one truth spoken into the right space. Power was moving now, but it wasn't loud, it didn't shout, it didn't threaten, it adjusted systems. It paused schedules, it grounded planes. Back in the cabin, the change became visible. The man in first class who had smirked earlier felt it before he understood it. His confidence drained away in pieces. He avoided looking down the aisle now, as if eye contact itself might accuse him. When his gaze accidentally met hers, he looked away fast. The relief he had felt earlier curdled into something like shame. The flight attendant stood near the galley, her face pale. The authority she had worn like armor had slipped off completely. She stared at the floor not because she was told to, but because she didn't know where else to look. The power she had relied on had evaporated, replaced by the cold realization that rules cut both ways. Power had changed seats, not with force, with truth. The woman remained calm through all of it. She didn't raise her voice when officials asked questions. She didn't correct anyone harshly. She didn't repeat herself more than necessary. She spoke clearly, simply, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the system and knows where they stand within it. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't seek revenge, because revenge is noisy. And this wasn't about noise. This was about dignity. She understood something most people never do until it's too late. That dignity doesn't come from a seat number. It doesn't come from upgrades or status or the way others look at you. It comes from knowing who you are when others try to reduce you to something smaller. She had been reduced before. She had learned to recognize the signs early, the tightened jaw, the raised voice, the threat disguised as procedure. She had seen it in airports and courtrooms and waiting rooms. She knew the cost of silence, and she knew the power of documentation. The officials finished their conversations and stepped back. One of them approached her again. This time, the respect was unmistakable, not performative, not forced, just there. He explained what would happen next, apologized for the delay, thanked her for her patience. She nodded. Around them, passengers listened closely. Some leaned forward, trying to catch every word. Others sat frozen, the weight of their earlier silence pressing on their chests. The story they would tell later was changing in real time. When the time came, she gathered her things and stood. This time no one told her to move. No one rushed her. No one questioned her right to be there. She walked down the aisle again, but the space felt wider now. The stairs followed her, but they had changed. They weren't sharp anymore. They weren't judging. They were searching, curious, respectful. When she reached the front, the door was open. She didn't get escorted off the plane. She was guided. An official walked beside her, not ahead, not behind. Equal pace, equal presence. The difference mattered. Outside the plane, the noise of the airport rushed in, bright and loud. Cameras weren't there yet, but attention was. You could feel it in the way people paused, in the way conversations softened. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she took a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, not because she was relieved, but because she was centered, grounded, whole. Inside the plane, silence followed her exit, not the kind filled with embarrassment, not the kind thick with guilt. This silence was different. It carried recognition of a truth many had avoided. That injustice doesn't disappear when ignored. That power can be challenged without shouting. That dignity once claimed has a way of reshaping rooms. The door closed behind her. Inside the cabin, people sat with what they had witnessed. Some replayed the moment she had been told to move. Others replayed their own inaction. A few felt something shift inside them, a quiet understanding that staying silent has a cost. The flight still wasn't leaving. Phones buzzed with updates, schedules changed, plans unraveled. But no one complained now, not out loud. The inconvenience felt smaller compared to the weight of what had just unfolded, because they had seen it. They had seen power stripped down to its truth. They had seen a woman refuse to shrink. And as the plane sat grounded, waiting for decisions far beyond that gate, one thing was clear to everyone on board. The story was no longer about a seat. It was about who gets to belong and who gets to decide. The announcement came quietly at first, almost like the airline hoped no one would notice. Then it spread, seat by seat, phone to phone, voice to voice. The flight was officially canceled, not delayed, not rerouted, canceled. And it wasn't alone. Dozens of flights followed, different cities, different gates, same reason. The system had stopped moving. People stood frozen in the aisle, staring at their screens, like they might change if they blinked. Others laughed in disbelief. A few cursed under their breath. Plans dissolved in real time. Meetings missed. Vacations postponed. Connections gone. The world that had felt so important just an hour ago suddenly felt small. News moved faster than frustration ever could. Faster than gossip. Faster than judgment. Faster than the assumptions people had made when they first saw her standing in the aisle. Screens lit up across terminals. Alerts buzzed. Headlines formed before anyone finished reading the last one. A single incident had become a national pause. The airline released a statement, carefully worded, polished, apologetic without admitting too much. They spoke of values, of commitment, of learning. Policies were under review. Training was being reinforced. They promised accountability in the way corporations always do, vague enough to protect themselves, clear enough to calm investors. Behind those statements, real things happened. Meetings were held behind closed doors, voices were raised, names were written down. Careers quietly ended, transfers were made, emails were sent late at night. The system adjusted, not because it wanted to, but because it had to. But the real lesson didn't belong to the company. It never did. It belonged to everyone who watched and said nothing. In the hours that followed, passengers scattered through the terminal, carrying more than their bags. Some avoided eye contact with strangers, replaying moments they wished they could redo. Others talked loudly, retelling the story in ways that softened their own silence. A few sat alone, staring out windows at planes that weren't going anywhere, thinking about how close they had been to speaking up. The woman moved through the airport calmly, escorted no longer, guided no longer. She walked on her own. Her phone buzzed constantly now. Messages, calls, requests. She ignored most of them, not because she didn't care, but because she understood something important. The moment had already done its work. Later, when she did speak publicly, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't point fingers. She didn't list names or demand punishment. She spoke with clarity, the kind that cuts deeper than anger ever could. Humiliation only works, she said, when silence protects it. Those words landed heavier than any accusation. She explained that she hadn't asked for special treatment. She hadn't wanted an upgrade. She hadn't demanded comfort. She had only asked for what every human deserves. Equal respect. Nothing more. Nothing less. Her voice didn't shake when she said it, because she had already lived the shaking part. What remained was truth. People listened. Some nodded. Some looked away. Some felt exposed. Because deep down they knew she wasn't just talking about a plane. She was talking about every moment someone had been singled out while others stayed quiet. Every time authority had gone unchecked because it was easier not to challenge it. Every time dignity had been traded for comfort. The airline's story faded from the headlines eventually. Another cycle, another scandal replaced it. But something lingered beneath the noise. Something harder to forget. That day became a reference point, a reminder passed around in quiet conversations and loud debates alike. It showed how fragile power really is when it depends on compliance. How quickly systems can stop when one person refuses to carry injustice alone. The woman returned to her work. Courtrooms, meetings, reports. The fight continued, as it always does. There was no victory lap, no celebration, just the steady movement forward. The way real change happens. But for the people on that flight, something had shifted. They had seen dignity hold its ground. They had seen authority questioned without shouting. They had seen silence break, not with chaos, but with consequence. That day, flights were canceled, schedules ruined, plans delayed, tempers tested, but something else took off. A reminder that power isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with raised voices or forceful hands. Sometimes it sits quietly in a seat, waiting, observing, ready. A reminder that strength isn't always aggressive. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like patience, like knowing exactly when to act. And a reminder that dignity, once claimed, can ground entire systems built on arrogance. No matter how high you fly, no matter how important your destination feels, no matter how insulated you think you are by status or silence, there is one truth you can never outrun. You can never rise above basic human decency. And when someone finally stands up to remind the world of that, everything else can wait.